Is race an issue in the US?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
We got that stereotype that we're alcoholics. So there's a border town that I grew up in named Winslow, Arizona. I've experienced it. It's like this Native American woman's coming in. While making my way back, back in my drinking days, I could stop in the liquor store and go grab some liquor, and right away I noticed it. Like, I'm getting side eye. I walked in one time and, I was like 2 tall cans, case of beer, and the lady was like, no, you choose one. And my mom has she has her physics degree that she earned at Northern Arizona University, and she was dating this guy. And in conversation, he was talking with his mom, and his mom said something like, oh, Stanlene has her degree. The way that your brother made it sound like she was still living in a teepee.
Slowly, people would say things that were very subtle. Oh, I could tell you're Native by your cheekbones. Oh, okay, I can tell by your hair. And just point out things that would identify me as a Native American. And then we'd get asked questions about what is it like to live on the reservation? Do you need a passport to be on the reservation? Do you guys still live in teepees? You get asked all of these questions.
And objectifying us.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, you're Native. Ooh, I've experienced that at work, just some ignorant people. There's a couple of times where I ran into people who were just being ignorant, like I was wearing and they were in style. I bought them like at Claire's or something, but they were earrings with these feathers, and I wore it at our lunch. And this idiot says, oh, Carleen, you look very tribal today, and he's like, it's very beautiful, very beautiful. I'm just like.
And what was crazy was that it was my manager. She is African American. She made it a point to, like, when we were alone, she'd be like, okay, yeah, we're outside thinkers. She would make it a point to say, okay, well, we're minorities, we're different from everybody else. But then when we were around the upper management, she acted white. And she would make like certain comments, being ignorant, just being, I want to say stupid, like saying shit like, well, let's have a powwow.
Kind of dumb shit. The negative thoughts or the negative stereotypes that come to mind when I'm doing something, and I kind of put up this protection, like, if I do this, are they gonna think this? Like, if I buy a 6-pack, are they gonna think I'm a Native alcoholic, or am I part of that stigma of being the alcoholic Native and with that bad reputation? So it kind of makes you hesitant a little bit. Or if you're kind of grubbing down on some good food, and you're in the back of my mind is this are people going to think like this is why Natives are diabetic all the time, or have that increase in health issues because of how I'm eating? So it's back of my mind. I do have that little voice that says, what does this look like if I do this?
Even just recently, he is a high school coach for a varsity girls basketball team. And he experienced racism going through that process. Like so he was hired, but it had to be paused because, people didn't like the fact that he was a Native American and going to be in this position. Like, I think even the athletic director who was pushing for Charles to get this position was called an Indian lover. So he really went through it just, with his position at the high school here. So that was disappointing. He warned me. He was always telling me about, racism that he's experienced living up here. And so we go into this restaurant, and ignored. We sat there for I don't know how long, but nobody came to get our order. It was something I had never, just so blatant, never experienced. White families were coming in, getting seated, even getting their food served already. It got to the point where it just made me so mad. Him and I both just got up and left, and we never stepped foot back into that restaurant.
And I think living in Arizona for like maybe 10 years, we had a Sheriff Joel Payo, that was very out to get Hispanics, Latinos, And so at that time, he said that it was okay to racially profile, to stop somebody because he was stopping and checking for citizenship. And so because we are blendable, and I am blendable, my husband's brown, we actually got our Navajo identification census number as an ID card so that we can carry it as proof that we are citizens. We have that, our driver's license, our social security, right? We have to show that we are citizens so that, because we could potentially have been racially profiled at any time by the police department. So that was something we kind of had to work around, even though it didn't really particularly target us. It was because of our skin color that we would be stopped. And are we going to be believed if we didn't have the appropriate documentation?
And Lawrence, you know, they look at you and they don't think that you're educated enough to say or articulate any sort of any words, any response to their vulgar responses to, well, you shouldn't be here, that kind of shit. And it's like, you know what? You shouldn't be here. You know, this is what I know, and this is what you don't know, you know, and it's just that. And then they like, oh shit, you know, then they stop. And it's like, okay, exactly, you know.
School, I think she was probably in 4th grade. I think somebody called her dirty Mexican, but she laughed because it's like, nice try, that's not what I am, you know, like this person couldn't even, she was laughing at the fact that this girl didn't even know who she was talking to. She just kind of threw it out there.
And I didn't really feel like we needed to talk about race. I just felt like we knew who we were at that time. We're born this way, we just know. But it wasn't until, you know, we would watch a lot of Disney movies. One of her favorites was Pocahontas. And when she was around about 5 or 6 years old, we went back to the reservation to visit family, and we stopped at a store along the freeway, Arizona, New Mexico border area. And they always have the porcelain Native American dolls and feathers, and it's very cliche items in the store. So we walked in and it was full of like dream catchers and feathers. And she was like, my daughter was 4, 5, or 6 at the time. And she's like, look at all of these savages in this store. And that was the moment that I realized I need to talk to her about who she is.
With Gabriel, my son, he sits in class, you know, around this time usually, and he'll listen at first. And so I'll ask him, you know, when he comes home that day, and I'll say, so what'd you guys talk about today? And he goes, oh yeah, Mom. He goes, so my teacher tried to, you know, talk about Columbus and how good he was and all this and that. And he goes, and I said, oh yeah. I said, was that it? And he goes, no. I said, so what'd you say? And my little smart ass kid, he was like, I told her the truth.
Share about it. And it's very true that trauma is carried from generation to generation, how they had their way of life, you know, and that has certain aspects and traits that were passed on to the children that were born in that era. And then you go into the generations when the colonizers and settlers were coming into town and spreading Christianity. That's a whole nother era of trauma that these outsiders are coming in, and really that's where the whitewashing is starting to become, or no, that's where we're savages, right? Where they're trying to settle and we're in the way. And the parents that were fighting at the time bore children, and so there's those survival mechanisms that have formed, those ways of coping, whether coping with that new scenario that was happening. And then you go to, let's fast forward to a boarding school era where people were taken from families, whitewashed, forced on religion, all shoved in a building for education, English, things like that. No parent role models, no
Did they also shave the Native people's hair?
Cut.
Yes, they
They've
cut them, and
Yeah.
that goes to speaking the languages too. If you're speaking your native tongue, you're going to be beaten because you need to speak English. English is the language. And so all of these children that were put into these boarding schools, abused, sexually assaulted, physically assaulted, no parent role models. They've grown up into the system and then released back to the reservation, and they're expected to have an identity and be able to raise children when they have a family. And so that's when they have to deal with the trauma that was brought onto them. They have to process all of that with no mental health services.
Guys, but my closing question for you is, what do you have to say to the people who make comments of race being non-existent, or when you share your experience, they question it and say, well, do you really think that was a race thing? Like, what do you guys have to say to those people?
I don't know what rock they're living under if they don't think racism is alive and well. Yeah, I don't. That's just plain ignorance to me. I really don't address the topic with people who pretend it doesn't exist, and it's usually people that are not that aren't African American or Mexican or Native American. It's usually white people who I've heard that from, or I've seen comments mostly like on Facebook. Yeah, it's not an imaginary thing. It's real.
Starla, Melanie?
I think the comment that I despise most is get over it. With the vines and the topics of colonizers taking over our land and them telling us we'll just get over it. And I go back to that, and that again just goes back to racism, obviously. And I do say that, I agree with Carleen 100%. It is alive and well. I include in that with just telling them, you don't see it from my perspective at all. And I wish you could. It's like, I wish I had a pair of glasses to give to you to see it from where I'm sitting every day, but I can't. I'm sorry. It's not the same.
I think for me, I love culture, and I love the differences that we all have and share, and similarities that we all have and share. I love learning about different cultures and interacting with different individuals. So when people say that I don't see color, or we're all one race, we might be, but we all are individual. Just like we have 3 different children, we tune to each of their needs, because one might be a little bit more sensitive, so we're going to talk to them and approach them in a different way. One might be a little more outgoing, so our interaction with them is going to be different. So we're all unique, and I would not want all of our uniqueness to be taken away because we're all one human race. So what I would want people to know or hear is be empathetic. If we're sharing with you what is hurtful or harmful, then I would appreciate some empathy.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining me and having this conversation, this difficult conversation. But I feel like these type of conversations need to be had, and I'm glad that you guys got on here with me and were super honest about everything and just yourself. So
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.